I'm Slaya, and this is Introduction to Tabletops, the Terms Language Part 2. So when I finished the last video on language and tabletops, I realized I'd forgotten some really fucking important terms like party. So I'm going to do a second one, and I might actually have to do a third one because I'm sure there are terms on this list that I'm missing and stuff. So again, I'm going to look at my phone and try to explain these as best I can. So, what's a party? It's not the, thing that you used to. It's actually simple. You probably have heard the term before and know what it is. It's simply just the group of players. Together they make up a party that goes on adventures together. It's basically it, not much to it. Another term I'm going to explain, you've probably also heard before, is the abbreviation OP. That stands for overpowered. It's kind of important when you have things like the Munchkin or the King of Kings, which is the next term I'm going to do. This is the person who dominates the game. This is like Munchkin to the max. He's the guy who wants to be the main character and often usurps other players and their needs to be that main character. If you remember last time when I explained the Munchkin, there was that guy who destroyed my playing experience. He was often a King of King. He would talk with the GM beforehand to make his character more prominent in the stories. I have so many examples of where he just took over the game and he was the most important thing there. And again, it's not fun, it's not fair. This is a team effort. This is a party effort. Don't play the King of Kings. And even if you find yourself doing that, because people tend to start taking on a leadership role and sometimes that can translate into being the main character, just try to notice and really stop yourself, because it can go too far, and again, a lot of games have been ruined by King of Kings. Next one I'm going to do is the session and the campaign. So the campaign is the larger story. It's the game you play over time. Call it a campaign because back in the day when this was more of a war game, like tabletops were more of a war game, which I'll also explain here. Basically what happened is it was more of a strategic play style. So if you think of Risk or Stratego, where you're trying to command armies, tabletopping used to be more along those lines, and D&D kind of took that and put in the role-playing, but even first edition of D&D tended to be more of a war game. It's why we have things like the dungeon crawl, where you have people going after monsters and having to defeat monsters and just, fight monsters. Because the origins was these commanding armies that people used to play with, and still do. I know a lot of people who do war games. And so the campaign kind of came from that. You have an army campaign. And so in tabletop terms, that's just the story, the long-term story that you're playing over several sessions. So a session is just simply one game of that. So one night of that, potentially. It can also mean a couple of nights of that, depending on how you configure your story. It's kind of like a chapter in the campaign, and the whole story is how I think I would describe it. You also have the one-shot, which is usually just one session that's not part of a larger campaign, but it can turn into a larger campaign, and it's just a contained story in of itself. It's shorter, more concise, etc. So then between sessions, you'll have something called downtime. And this is basically time between sessions that you can plan things for the next session. So a lot of times people will, plan out their equipment or their strategy for the next game, or where they're going to go. So when you get to the game, the next session, you're already prepared. You're not taking hours to figure out what you're leveling up and everything like that. We'll go into that more in depth when we go into explaining how to build characters. So that's just downtime. People use it for story purposes a lot, to expand the story a little bit, which sometimes you can't really do during sessions, especially if there's something personal you need to do with the GM that you don't want to involve other players. Next is going to be the Rule Zero. The Rule Zero is sometimes the GM will have to put their foot down. A lot of times you'll see players, the rules lawyer, this is a person who takes out the book, thumps it down on the table, and is like, this is what it says in the book, this is what you have to do. You don't. They're more of a guideline than anything else, and sometimes when people push a rule that the GM doesn't really want to employ, it can be really annoying for other players. And so Rule Zero is really what the GM says goes. So it can be a rule, it can be a story aspect, it can be just whatever it is that the GM has to say, look, you can't do that, or that's really not conducive to the story, it's not conducive to helping other players. And this is something you'll realize with tabletops in general, is that you don't have to follow the book to the letter of the law. You can deviate, you can make your own stuff up, and it's often better to do that, to homebrew a little bit, which is, change things a little to make it easier for your story, because that just makes it more fun. Like, the developers, the people who wrote the tabletop, have their own idea of what they want to play. But when you're a GM and you go into these settings, you have your own ideas of what you want to run, and these settings can help you do that, they can give you ideas. But what I said in my last video about knowing your setting and knowing what to do for the future if something goes wrong, that often means that you're going to make up your own stuff, and you're going to work within the setting to really expand it, to expand your own story, and that's what a good GM is. And then what you also have is the railroading. So with the Rule Zero, it can get a little tricky because you don't want to railroad. Railroad is just a metaphor. If you have a straight track and it goes forward and that's the only track you go, yeah, you'll see with some GMs, and these are the more bad ones, and again, I'm going to do a video about this, where they just want to keep to their own storyline and move forward, and they don't want to listen to their other players, so they'll employ Rule Zero to stop other players from, going through that door they didn't want them to go through. It's obnoxious. I've played games like that. I've seen games like that. Sometimes I've even had to do it. Now, that's a little trickier. And I will get into that when I talk about the things that GMs do and do not do, or, my next video on the GMing. But for the most part, do not railroad. It is not fair, and it's not fun to your party. So those are all the terms I have for today. If you have any suggestions of things I missed, please put them in the comments below. I know you guys haven't really been commenting, so come on, guys. Share this, comment, just give us some feedback of how you feel about this, and, share this with new people who want to get into tabletopping. So I hope this all helps, and I'll see you next time with potentially another GM video and a player video, and soon we're thinking of getting into, how to build a character and mechanics of games, and how to really work with the settings and tabletops that you are given. So, see you next time.